I've had a particularly fascinating life. Would you like to hear about it? You would.
20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. In 1932, author Walter Pitkin told us that life begins at 40. 40 is now in the rearview mirror for me, but even still, I've always been of the mind, why wait? Sadly, in this, the most prosperous nation on earth, in the most prosperous time in history, when life should be full of endless possibilities, too many instead see it full of only risk. And I don't see that as a coincidence. Life is so easy that anything with even the slightest risk elicits fear in a large portion of the population. Well, I ascribe to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's notion that
the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
To repeat another common saying, fear is nothing more than false evidence appearing real. Life is full of risk, yes, but it's that risk that makes life worth living. I suppose I owe much of this outlook to my parents, Bohemians both. My father was a Greek-American who owned art galleries, prize-winning racehorses,
That's all, Savannah Blue Jeans.
was doubly inducted into the Northwest Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, had 2 songs in the Billboard Top 100, and although he never played guitar with Jimi Hendrix once played guitar with him. My mother was a cheerleader and voted best looking in her high school, but eschewed convention and became a hippie, living in Canada for a time and catching turkeys for Bob's You Grow 'Em, We Catch 'Em, before moving back to Washington and becoming an award-winning poet and artist who once had her art car featured in People magazine. I was basically born in my uncle's jazz club, where my father was the bartender and my mother was a waitress. It's a wonder they didn't name me Billy Joel. Instead, they named me Louis Prima. As a result of my upbringing, I started living life unconventionally at an early age, listening to Chopin albums, hanging out with Dizzy Gillespie and Slim Gaillard, spending weekends at the horse track, and putting on the occasional show at my father's gallery. A fair amount of my formative years was also spent in the old country, visiting relatives who spit on me, for good luck you see, riding donkeys, hanging upside down in butcher shops, and eating lots of meat on a stick, all which helped spur a lifelong love of travel. I also spent a great deal of my youth being raised by my mother's parents, about the farthest any two people could be from Bohemian. My grandfather was a rocket scientist at Boeing, and he and my grandmother, who raised 4 kids of their own before my mother and I moved back in with them, taught me much of what I know today. At their home on Lake Washington, I enjoyed an upbringing punctuated by lots of summer parties and vacations to plenty of places around our nation, which helped spur my love of entertaining and my love of history. During college, I became increasingly interested in politics, which led to an internship with the Washington State Senate. While there, the Senate Majority Leader encouraged me to run for office. As a Republican in Seattle, even in 2004, I was the first opponent the incumbent had ever had, and I knew my chances of winning the lottery were better than winning that race. But I still had fun, learned a lot about politics and about myself.
Instead of just throwing money at the problem, we have to see what the problem is.
And made many friends I still have to this day. That race, and the continuing involvement in politics that followed it, changed the trajectory of my life more than any other single event. Without it, I would not have formed the relationships that led to my faith and hope in Christ and meeting my wife.
Now my life is rosy, since I found my Rosie.
Which has led to 3 great kids, Andrew, James, and Peter, only 9 more and we have the complete set, and in a roundabout sort of way, to this fine community of Coeur d'Alene and this Rotary Club. And it was all because I took the risk of running a race I knew I wouldn't win, a risk that some even cautioned me against. Another one of those occasions when I eschewed convention and took a risk was when my wife and I decided to move to Greece for 4 months, making it our home base while we explored much of the rest of Europe. While several people thought it was a splendid idea, others cautioned us not to be so reckless. There will be plenty of time to travel when you're retired, was one remark. While there's certainly some wisdom to saving for retirement, we must also remember that tomorrow is promised to no one, so to some extent, we should try to live for today, and I'm sure glad we did. Not only was I more fit at 30 than I will be at 70, and therefore was able to do things I won't be able to do later in life, like canyoning in the Swiss Alps or bobsleighing down an Olympic track, we also saw things that are no longer there. It's not like those old ruins are going anywhere, was another quip we heard from the naysayers. Well, as it turns out, just a week before we visited Pompeii, the 2,000-year-old House of the Gladiators collapsed. Part of the Cinque Terre was buried in a mudslide the year after that, and then, as you may remember, part of Notre Dame in Paris collapsed in April of 2019. I've also been fortunate enough to have stood atop the Twin Towers, and there's certainly no symbol greater than that to remind us that tomorrow is promised to no one. And one last thing about taking a risk. Often, it's easier than you think. When I was president of my last Rotary Club, we were our district's only nominee for Rotary International's Significant Achievement Award. The little secret? We were the only club in the district to submit a project for it. So, sometimes the only risk you have to take is to show up.
Seattle Skyline Rotary meets every Tuesday for lunch atop the Columbia Tower in downtown Seattle. Because of this lofty location, our club's motto is High on Service, and one way that we put those words into action is through our project filling small bags of food and distributing them to the homeless on the streets of Seattle.
I've met so many incredible people, from musicians like Dizzy Gillespie and actors like John Voight, to astronauts like Frank Borman, as well as dozens and dozens of political leaders and media personalities. My willingness to do what many have looked upon in awe as something they could never do even led me to hosting 2 different radio shows where I was able to interview many noteworthy people, including Flash Gordon actor Sam J. Jones and Carolyn Grimes, a truly wonderful person who you may remember as little Zuzu Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. I've traveled to dozens of foreign countries and most of the United States. I've prayed with Patnawasi and feasted with Fezians. I've met fascinating off-the-beaten-path characters like this guy who had an odd little museum of animal bone art located in the Italian Tyrol. I've attended weddings and dinner parties in Germany, Italy, and France. And let me tell you, if you've never attended a French dinner party, you've truly never lived. Why, I even crashed a party in Liechtenstein and once walked into a pub in rural England, went up to the bar to order a pint and was met with, "Oi, you're an American. We haven't had an American here since the war. Pints on me." I've rung in the new year with East Indian stewardesses in Zurich and this crazy group of gals in Puerto Vallarta in my younger years, and better yet, with my lovely wife in Venice in my less younger years. I've been in the society pages and on the red carpet. I've eaten sheep's brain, goat's blood, chicken feet, and most recently, Rocky Mountain oysters. I've sailed some of the 7 seas and swam with sea turtles and sharks. I've wrestled alligators, raced a Ferrari, ridden horses in North Africa and donkeys in Greece, rafted rivers, flown helicopters and airplanes, and even jumped out of a couple. I've been featured in newspapers from Seattle to Salzburg. I've done stand-up comedy.
You want a really unique name? Reach in the Scrabble bag, pull out 7 tiles. That's your name. Oh, that's a nice baby. What's his name? Oh, that's interesting. Is that Polish? No, it's Scrabble, and we're very excited because it's got a Q and an X, and it's on a triple word score.
Acted in commercials and on TV.
Supposed to be some alligator in these waters, Louis, and you're gonna help us, is that right? Yeah. Looking for some gator. Look, there's a gator there. Go get him, Louis. Yeah, get him, Louis. There's gonna be some new shoes in it for you.
And even made a short film myself. I've done so much in my 4 decades on this planet that I can hardly believe it myself. But not all that gain has been without some pain. I was nearly murdered in Morocco, and I've been stranded in rural Mexico. I've had my heart broken a few times, and while I once sold a multi-million-dollar mansion just a few months prior to that, I'd been working the graveyard shift at an Amazon warehouse. I've washed dishes, loaded bread trucks, waited tables, and sold everything from cruise vacations to corkscrews. And while I've never been a hippie, I have played one on TV. And through it all, even in the darkest moments, I've always relied on hope. Hope in my Lord and Savior that all things that happen are part of His greater plan. Fortunately, I've lived through enough heartbreak, despair, and loss at this point that when it comes along, I now take it in stride, knowing that it is but preparation for something bigger and better. To quote American author Lloyd Alexander, "Life's a forge. You'll be roasted, smelted, and pounded, and you'll scarce know what's happening to you. But stand boldly. Metal's worthless till it's shaped and tempered. Face the pounding. Don't fear the proving, and you'll stand well against any hammer and anvil." And perhaps the best lesson the trials in life have taught me is that life is a gift. I'm so grateful for all the amazing experiences I've had, in part because I've also experienced the hardships and spent time with others who've experienced even worse. And those who seemingly had the least, the fisherman in Santorini, the family in Semastopol, the Turkish refugee in Paris, the mechanic in Montillon, all have also given the most and loved the greatest. They fed not just my body, but my soul. Experiences like these are what have guided me to serve as best I can. I'm far from perfect, but I continue to strive to be a better servant every day, shunning fear and taking the risks in life which make it worth living, knowing that the pain is part of the gain and that hope and love will win in the end. So join me in taking a risk. Live life with Elan. Love fully. Embrace hope. Be a little silly. Live life on the edge. Take that leap of faith. And remember the words of the great risk-taker and adventurer Theodore Roosevelt. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, blood, and sweat, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least failed, while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with these cold and timid souls who know neither defeat nor victory.